I go, I'm putting on. Putting on, putting on. Everywhere I go, I'm putting on. Putting on, putting on. Everywhere I go, I'm putting on. Putting on. Where you from?
Welcome to Popcorn Sports on the Popcorn Entertainment Network. I'm your host, Mike Kyle, and welcome to yet another episode of Why You Should Root for every team in the NBA for the 2018-2019 season. I, of course, am not alone. I am joined here by Bruno Passos. You can follow him on Twitter at BouncePassos. He covers the San Antonio Spurs from PoundingTheRock.com. Bruno, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing well, Mike. Just counting down the days till opening night. How are you?
I'm great. At the time we are recording this, we are 5 days away. Super excited about that. So my first question for you is, how did you become a fan of the Spurs and ultimately begin to cover them?
So I spent many of my formative years here in San Antonio growing up from about the age of 10. So good time to start getting into basketball. Shortly after that coincided with beginning of the Tim Duncan and Greg Popovich era, so very easy to kind of hop on board and start cheering on the team. Started covering the team, I believe, in 2013 through sort of back channels you end up taking to get into blogging with Pounding the Rock, and I've been covering the team ever since. Last year was my first one as a credentialed writer here in San Antonio, going to the games and being a bit closer to the team, and looking forward to year number 2 coming up.
Yeah, that's really cool, and I kind of have a very similar roundabout way for myself. So last year I worked for the Cavs, and that was towards the end of the regular season going into the playoffs, and it was just so weird because, it's like, as an NBA writer in my past life before this, it's, you're covering from the outside looking in. And then once you get credentialed and once, you're going around the lower levels of the arena and weaving your way in and meeting different people and important people for that matter, I mean, just that experience is just so surreal. And so for last season, me, your first, kind of explain that. Like, what were your insights? What did you like? What didn't you like? Things like that.
Yeah, first year, you're spending a lot of time just kind of watching people trying to act like you've been there before, but it's all so new. So sitting on in the press seats and trying not to pump my fist whenever the Spurs do something good was a key priority for season 1. Just seeing how the people have been doing it for years and just chatting with the other members of the media. And no, just it's really just been about enjoying it so far. Wouldn't be doing it if you didn't, I think, at least if you're someone in my position. And just trying not to let people put last year's weird season on me and my new arrival to the team. So no, it's all been a really fun experience thus far, and looking forward to going into this next season.
Right, and we'll cover that weird year a little bit later in this interview. But before we do that, I want to dive into the general overview of the San Antonio Spurs. So they joined the NBA in 1976. They're called the Spurs in reference to the culture of Western Texas. Their colors are gray, silver, and white. 38 playoff appearances, 5 championships, with their last being in 2014, and they play in the Southwest Division with the other 2 Texas teams being Houston and Dallas, also with New Orleans and Memphis. Now let's just shift gears automatically into last season. We'll talk about this for a little bit because I don't want to spend too much time because the Spurs roster is very different than last year's. But last season, they went 47-35. They lost in the first round of the Western Conference playoffs. And of course, there was the Kawhi Leonard saga. Before we even get into Kawhi Leonard, and like I said, I only want to touch on him for just a little bit because this is a brand new season. What can you make of last season as a whole for me?
Yeah, I mean, it was everything Kawhi, really, which was both new and interesting to cover, but also a bit frustrating because we knew so little about it throughout. So it was the kind of context that you had throughout but without any sort of light onto what was going on. So Kawhi obviously was first ruled out of the preseason, not just about over a year ago from today. And then went on to, work his way back into the rotation temporarily for 9 games, then was ruled out shortly after that. And only a little bit after that did we start getting rumblings that there was, some stuff going on, some distance between player and team, ultimately leading to the trade demands and trade on July of this year.
Yeah, I mean, just going through the Spurs statistics this season or this past season, I'm kind of just going through and trying to analyze everything before we were prepping for this interview. And one of the things I noticed is that just as a team, their defense was spectacular. If you look at all the statistical categories, as far as defense goes, they were pretty much top 15, top 10 in every single one of them. And the offense is where they really seem to struggle, and that's where they miss Kawhi Leonard especially.
Definitely, yeah. So Popovich will be the first to say, defense is where this team is almost always going to hang its hat. And basically in his entire tenure, the lowest that the defense is ranked in defensive rating is something like 11th. It's almost always in the top 10, usually top 5. And, it's really benefited from the kind of continuity system, understanding that the Spurs really try and preach, retaining players and really getting them to understand what Pop expects for them. And then offensively, generally, it's a lot of ball movement, motion stuff. Last year with Kawhi gone, they sort of had to adapt on the fly and make it a team around LaMarcus Aldridge. So they led the league in post-up possessions, and it was really not what you typically expected from the Spurs. But this is a team that adapts sometimes. It's not a static system offensively. And it's just what they had to do, and still managed to reel off 47 wins. But it's safe to say it wasn't always pretty.
Right, and the one thing is too. So obviously with Kawhi, let's just eliminate him from the conversation entirely. What did you learn as a Spurs? What did you learn from the Spurs last season?
So it's a good question. You learn that they're not immune to a lot of the things that happen to other teams. That's obviously talking about Kawhi, but that's probably the big takeaway. Beyond that, you do see that next man up mentality still happened. You had guys like Kyle Anderson come out. DeJounte Murray had a breakout year. You really still see, and there's a lot of truisms with the Spurs that you get used to over time, but you see how the program that the way they refer to the team internally does manage to produce talents by bringing them up through the G League and putting them in positions to succeed. And the team is going to be counting on that again this year.
Right, so that's a great segue into this year's roster. You're looking at LaMarcus Aldridge, the big trade for DeMar DeRozan involving Kawhi Leonard, DeJounte Murray, who unfortunately just tore his ACL. They drafted Lonnie Walker out of Miami, who also just tore his meniscus, so he'll be out 6 to 8 weeks. Pau Gasol, Derek White, Rudy Gay, Jacob Poeltl, who was also involved in that Kawhi Leonard trade, Marco Bellinelli, Patty Mills. What do you expect from this roster this year? Maybe give me some guys who you're really looking forward to watching.
Yeah, so you named two, unfortunately, in the injury list that were probably at the tops of most people's lists, which is, DeJounte Murray was primed for another leap. He's gone. Lonnie Walker's a really interesting guy. Most rookies don't get opportunities really with Pop, but a guy just oozing potential. This year, Derek White, the guard who will now be stepping in probably as the starting point guard, at least for the time being, is an interesting guy. He played just 139 minutes with the varsity team last year, spent most of his time in Austin, but a versatile, like 6'4", 6'5" guard who play the 1, play the 2, can shoot the 3. He's really good at, he can hit the floater. He can do those in-between things that you really want out of a point guard. That, it doesn't show those sort of deficiencies that defenses can exploit. So White, I think, is primed for a pretty interesting season with the Spurs, given the opportunity that he'll have. And I think Rudy Gay is going to be a fun player to watch. He's shown considerable burst that he didn't have last year since he was coming back from that Achilles injury. And I think he's another year in the Spurs system, whether he's starting or not, is really going to produce.
Yeah, you mentioned Derek White. You actually just wrote a piece about him for PoundingTheRock.com. Be sure to check that out. I'll leave a link to that in the description down below. The player I'm most interested about this season for the Spurs is DeMar DeRozan. Because I don't want to say, I don't believe he was misused in Toronto. But I think Popovich is going to be the guy that's going to get the most out of him. What are your expectations for DeRozan this season?
Yeah, so Pop has really talked about how he's learned from some of the, I guess, I don't even want to say mistakes because it's not like all, but the friction that he had with working LaMarcus Aldridge into the Spurs system, and how he doesn't doesn't plan on repeating those with DeMar DeRozan. So I think at least to start, he's going to try and just let DeMar be comfortable, be somewhat of the kind of player he was in Toronto, which last year, second team all NBA, all-star, very effective player, if not efficient in the 2018 sense of the word for the NBA. But so I think we're going to see him putting him just in the similar sets that you're used to, putting the ball in his hands, putting him in the pick and roll with LaMarcus, and letting him work in the ISO, just those types of things to really ease him in. But there's reason to think that DeMar can still take another step, at least defensively, but also really brought into as a Spurs player. So I think there's still definitely room for optimism looking into what you expect from DeMar coming into the season.
You touched on it a little bit earlier, and that was just how LaMarcus Aldridge, there was some friction when he was first acquired to go to San Antonio, and how the what's the right word? The gelling process, should we say, did not go well to start. What are Spurs fans' feelings right now about LaMarcus Aldridge, and what do you think the organization's feelings about LaMarcus Aldridge are right now?
Yeah, I think everyone, for once, is on the same page and really happy with him. The fans weren't always the highest on him. They felt that he sort of underperformed in his first two seasons. Definitely, I think that second season had some low points, and people really pointed to his struggles against the Warriors in the 2017 playoffs. But fair to say that not that he needed to redeem himself, but last season he really put the team on his shoulders, and they would obviously not have made the playoffs and kept that streak alive and gotten to 47 wins if it wasn't for his terrific work. Just really the only thing that worked on offense consistently. And if he can still continue, it'll be a real test for him to see if now with a high volume wing scorer sort of counterweighting him on offense, if he'll still feel comfortable. So that's something to keep an eye out for going into the season. But I think everyone's really high on LaMarcus, and really happy that he's re-signed and going to continue to be one of the pillars of this team.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. Obviously the first year or so, it didn't look good. And then second year two, you saw a little bit of an improvement, and now you're looking to just really use that as a building block for this season. And one of the things that I've been on record of saying, and I feel like people don't fully understand the effect of right now, is this is a new era of the Spurs. No Tim Duncan, Manu Ginobili retired, Tony Parker now plays for Charlotte, Kawhi's out. Popovich is like the only pillar standing of this organization that we've known and that we've grown up with. So with that in mind, because what do you expect out of the Spurs team, maybe even this year and then going forward?
Yeah, I mean, you said it. So this is a team that, considering they were already going to be emerging out of the Big Three era, which normally would result in multiple steps back for a franchise, they put themselves in such a great position to succeed with Kawhi Leonard and building this new roster around his talents. And then you obviously see what happened last year. So they're in the fallout not only of the Big Three leaving, but of everything that happened last season. So moving forward, they're not in what would you consider an optimal situation, but they salvaged it as best as they could, bring in DeMar DeRozan in, guy who's I think 29 years old, so not exactly a rebuilding piece, but more of a bridge alongside LaMarcus Aldridge. So this isn't exactly by design, but this is a team that's the focus is going to remain on winning and trying to sustain the right kind of culture and a culture of winning through these players. And they don't rebuild, but they're going to be making the micro steps that they need to really keep kicking the rock down and keep the team in a good place, and then to try and get it into a great place in the future. They don't have necessarily a lot of cap room to work with next summer. So they're just going to be, I think, looking for little adjustments that they can here and there. We're trying to develop those younger players on the team, which there are a fair few. Unfortunately, a pair of them are injured, but they should hopefully both come back, and those should be building blocks for the future. And I think that's where fans should really be focusing their optimism right now, is seeing how Murray is moving forward, how White develops this season, how Walker comes back, guy Jakob Poeltl, who just came in on the Kawhi Leonard trade, who has a lot of potential for a big man. And Davis Bertans, who they've re-signed over the summer, 6'10" guy who can shoot on the move as like a guy much shorter, and so there's some interesting young pieces for optimism in the future, and a pretty decent team to root for in the now.
One of the things I joked about on Twitter once the DeJounte Murray news came out, because first Walker went down, and then literally a week and a half later, Murray blows out his ACL. But one of the things I joked about is, I don't know why we're panicking, because we know Pop's still going to win 50 games. And one of the stats I came across, and I knew this was out there, but I didn't really know the full extent of this, is in the past 19 seasons, the Spurs have won less than 50 games one time, and that was last season. That is unfathomable.
It is. This is, it's a fan base that's obviously been spoiled tremendously. So that is sort of the lens through which they view the team and the standards that they hold it to. And again, Popovich obviously is a huge part of that success. He's still around now. If it's obviously it wasn't just him, and he's the first to say that the Spurs culture and their ability to sustain had a lot to do with Tim Duncan, who left a few years ago, and we've seen sort of a bit more instability since. So Pop is still around, and that's reason for hope. But it's also with Duncan gone, with the big three gone, expectations should still be tempered a little bit more than hoping to see this team just endure ad infinitum.
Right. I want to shift gears now to the fan base, the fun, the culture surrounding the San Antonio Spurs. To me, the Spurs just represent basketball purity. Just one of the best, if not the best, organizations in the NBA. Their coach is damn near flawless. They play just such a very, smooth style of basketball. Their culture they have is, like I just said, one of the best in the leagues. What can you make of the fans, the culture, and just the overall fun surrounding the San Antonio Spurs?
It is. So it's great to have an organization that you can trust to do the right things, to keep the long view in mind, and to continue winning in the short term. So I think you see a lot of fan bases still, organizations are getting smarter, but there's still a few dysfunctional ones out there, prone to making just truly boneheaded moves. And the Spurs are not that. They're from the top down. They've got the right kind of ownership, the right front office that trusts the coach, empowers him, and a coach that then empowers his other coaching staff and his players. So it's a system that just works. It's an ecosystem of development and winning that the organization has created, and it makes it a really fun team to watch purely for that reason. Dysfunction is not fun, and that's not really something you see in San Antonio.
Do you think the reason why there isn't as much, obviously there's hardly little to no dysfunction in San Antonio, but do you think part of that is because San Antonio is such a very small, condensed market? I feel like that kind of takes some pressure off of the organization, because you don't have the lights of maybe a New York or a Los Angeles.
That could be it, and the organization just, they sort of take advantage of that. They do try and insulate things a bit to make it about the on-court product. They don't have this debt to this huge media machine to where they need to put these players out there and do kind of bolder things and let their players just put their players into these positions where they don't necessarily want to speak. So they and it lets the focus be beyond the court, and they handle matters in-house, there's a singular focus, and I think being a small market definitely is conducive to that.
So I want to go now to the more fan side of things, because as you mentioned at the top, you write now for poundingtherock.com, and you grew up in San Antonio. So you, like a few of the other guests I've had on, they've grown up in the city, and now they write about the team. And so there's always a little bit of an interesting dynamic, I feel, there, because one, you have your take from being in the city, from being in the state, wherever it may be. So you understand the culture surrounding everybody, and just really you have like a personal first-hand experience with the fans of the team. But then there's also the social media aspect of it, where you are a writer and you are a blogger for Pounding the Rock. So you get to interact with Spurs fans from all across the country and all around the world. What can you just make of Spurs fans as a whole?
Spurs fans, yeah, it's a different experience talking to somebody at the supermarket to engaging with somebody on Twitter who could be really anywhere. There's a lot more of a personal touch to when you're talking to somebody just around town. They talk about things in a lot more of a conversational manner. It's definitely not about the metrics or spacing or anything like that. It's about the performance. It's about what's going on with this person day to day. It's about what happened last night. Your conversations on NBA Twitter tend to be a lot more of influenced by the wider NBA intelligentsia stuff. So it's fun, and both sides are important. I think when you're writing and wanting to tell more of a story that's beyond the numbers, I think keeping that local flavor in mind is really helpful. And then it's also helpful again to have that perspective that you do come across on Twitter and in the blogosphere. So I think being here in San Antonio and covering the team, and also trying to be online without going insane it's good to have a balance. I think it helps with writing.
Do you have a favorite Spurs moment that sticks out in your time writing and covering the team? Maybe it'd be a moment on NBA Twitter. Maybe you just had a conversation with somebody and it was like just super pleasant and it just kind of rolled. Do you have any memories or moments that just stick out?
It's very easy to go back to something that's somewhat recent. So it could be anything really from what ended up being the Manu Ginobili retirement tour last season, which was really fun because I was able to cover that in person and be around for some of those last few amazing moments. Something from the 2014 run is extremely easy for any Spurs fan to get nostalgic about, just the kind of arc that was just from a 2-3 year stretch, really emerging from the heartbreak of 2013. But sure, I mean, there's stuff I think that's personal, and for some reason you just remember certain moments throughout. There's that Tim Duncan 3-pointer that he used to beat the Suns in the playoffs about 10 years ago or so. That was for whatever reason it's easy to remember sort of where I was and the excitement from that. But it's a team that's had a lot of highs over the past 20 years, and thankfully it's bit tough to come up with one straight off the top of my head.
Yeah, those 20 years of highs and not many lows. So Bruno, we'll wrap it up with this. You have 30 seconds to pitch anybody why they should be a fan of the San Antonio Spurs this season. The floor is yours.
All right, I'll try and make this topical for what's going on right now. So I think there are fans who they're messy benches who love drama, to quote the Good Place. There's people who see what's happening with the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Jimmy Butler trade demands, and they think that's a fun thing. Well, the Spurs had a similar situation, and look at where they are now. They're focusing on the season ahead. They've taken what was a potentially just as bad of a situation, and they've salvaged it and turned it into what should be a drama-free, relatively clean, clear waters, whatever. It's all basketball here. So if you're a fan who doesn't want to get mixed up in that, then the Spurs are the team for you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Bruno. Oh my goodness, that was Bruno Passos. You can follow him on Twitter at BouncePassos. He covers the San Antonio Spurs for PoundingTheRock.com. Bruno, do you have anything else to plug?
No, that's it. No, follow me, follow the Pounding the Rock, and just get ready for what should be a fun and very weird season of Spurs basketball.
Awesome. Well, Bruno, thank you so much for coming on, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, guys, if you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. We're doing this for every team in the NBA, and I think at this point we've already done 18 or so, so we got 12 more to go. Be sure to check all those out. There's a playlist in the link in the description down below, and with that, we'll catch you next time.